Hello, everybody. Today, I'm very excited to take another episode of Money Disrupted Live with the author of one of the most seminal books and important topics of the Federal Reserve, The Creature of Jekyll Island, Mr. G. Edward Griffin. I had an incredible opportunity to interview him a year ago to speak about the book, to lend his expertise, this incredible story of the financial system that we have under today. So I want to bring Mr. Griffin here live with us. Thank you, Mr. Griffin, for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me, Christopher. Much appreciated.
So I looked up a stat since the last time we spoke. Any idea how much money the Federal Reserve has printed into existence?
I don't think there's enough ink to write it on a piece of paper. No, I haven't. But it's astronomical. It's absolutely insane.
The number is 2.3 trillion. Since the time I interviewed you early in 25 to here in early in 26, they have printed 2.3 trillion additional dollars onto our national debt. So it is an ongoing issue. I'm kind of curious. You were an early critic in the Federal Reserve system. I think many people still don't understand, which is why I tried to create this film to help people understand the financial system that backs our government and the corporation behind it. What kind of got you interested in this topic? Why did you decide to write The Creature of Jekyll Island, the seminal book on this topic?
That's a tough question to answer because it's hard for me to remember. My initial interest was not very deep. I was just starting off as a starving film producer. I wanted to make documentary films, but I had no money. So everything was on a budget, on a shoestring. And I was looking around for topics that I could produce short documentaries on, if I may end the sentence with a proposition. And I thought, well, inflation would be a good topic. I didn't know much about inflation, but I thought there's probably some mystery behind it. I don't understand it. I'll do inflation. And so I started to do some research. Well, you can imagine where that can of worms led me. I spent quite a bit of time finding all the books I could find on the topic, finding all the references in the news journals and lectures that people were delivering in banking. I looked at the textbooks that they were using in the colleges. And the first thing I thought, this is too big a topic for me. I'm just a little kid from Detroit, east side of Detroit. I don't know anything about banking or money. So I parked all those banker boxes aside and just said, maybe some other day. But then a series of events, which are not too important. I was invited to speak once before a group in Pasadena on the topic of taxation. And I remember the lady that sponsored the event, nice little old lady from Pasadena, as you've heard them say. She was the real thing. And she had a study group, she called it, that she held in her home every month on taxation. And her motive, of course, was to arouse some interest in the topic and maybe a little opposition to rampant taxation. So I said, well, Madeline, or whatever her name was, I said, I don't know much about taxation, except that it's too big and I'm against it. So what more can I say? And I said, but however, I might have a topic on a hidden tax. Would you be interested in a hidden tax? And she said, oh, a hidden tax. What would that be? I said, well, you just have to retain me for the lecture and I will come and explain it to you.
For the knowledge is available for the low price of my speaking fee.
Well, the truth of the matter is there was no speaking fee anyway.
Okay.
I was giving speeches to anybody that wanted to listen because I was on my crusader horse. I was crusader rabbit, you might say. So I was looking for audiences. Anyway, so I did it and it was well received. I think she had about 60 or 70 people in her living room. And at the end of it, a couple of these people came up and said, that was really interesting what you put together, because I just pulled those banker boxes out and said, oh, wow, I remember that. So I cobbled something together. And they said, that was very interesting. You should put that on the road. Well, what an idea that was. So it sounded to me like my fans, quote unquote, all both of them, were suggesting that I go on the road with this. So I thought that's not a bad idea. So I started to put on what we call the 1 day seminars, a crash course on money, is what we called it. And I started on the road. I traveled all around the United States and putting on these 1 day seminars. And it was very successful. And, I learned a lot about the topic. Once you have to explain it to somebody,
Right.
it really drives it into your skull. So I learned, I think, more in the second time around that data because I had to explain it to people than I did the first time when I read it. So I was training myself and learning as I was giving these lectures. I was pretending like I was an expert. Well, compared to the people in the audience, I was an expert because I'd read a book or so. And that's all it takes nowadays. But now I'm coming to the point, and this is probably already longer than you anticipated, but at the end of one of those 1 day seminars, another little old lady came up to me, a sweet lady, and she said, "Well, Mr. Griffin," and that was kind of a joke because here's this 80-year-old woman, and I'm probably at that age, probably about 27 or 28, 29 years old, just a kid, And she's calling me Mr. Griffin. I almost fell off of my high chair on that one. She said, "Well, Mr. Griffin, when my husband passed away a few years ago, we had a small savings account and life insurance, and I used that to borrow some money to invest in an small apartment unit. But I'm in debt. Now, having listened to you, I'm wondering, should I get out of debt? Should I sell the apartment? Should I buy silver or gold or something where there's no debt involved? How should I invest my money because I can't afford to lose it?" And that was like a dagger in me because I remember the moment just like it was 10 minutes ago. I said, I gave her some silly advice about, well, you've got to diversify your investments, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, put some cash in the bank and so forth. The usual stuff that you expect to read on the internet or a high school textbook or something like that, how to invest wisely for the common guy. But this was not what she needed. She needed some real financial advice. And I walked away from that and said, I'm a fraud, talking to myself. I pretend like I know something. This little lady wanted some advice, and I didn't know anything about the markets. I knew about the banks. I knew about inflation. When it came to what to do with your money, I was as dumb or dumber than anybody you could possibly think of. So I stopped giving those seminars, dead stop. And I enrolled in the College for Financial Planning, which is it's probably the top. It's a correspondence course, actually, for financial planners. And it sort of has the same status as a CPA, except it's just for financial planning. And that usually takes a couple of years. I crashed through it in about a year and a month or two. And I passed the course. I got my CFP designation, not because I wanted to become a financial planner, but because I wanted to know something about the real markets of the world so I wouldn't embarrass myself from here on out when people were asking me the tough questions. Well, that was a very wise thing for me to do, wiser than I realized, because when I squirted out the other end of the hose with all these books that they dump on you, I had this reality in my mind that they were teaching the wrong thing. They were teaching all the upcoming financial planners basically how to use the existing corrupt system to their advantage. Because the financial planners, as you probably know, get a little rake, a little commission every time they buy something. So they're motivated to switch and to rotate from this investment to that one on the ruse that, well, maybe the markets are changing now and we have to follow the markets. So we're going to sell this stock and buy that stock. And meanwhile, the financial planners are making out like gangbusters, but the investors probably aren't doing so well. And none of them realized how fraudulent the banking practices were. and they would never really didn't want to know because now it's their bread and butter. So I came away with this insider type of information. I thought, somebody ought to write a book on this. Well, I looked in the mirror and I said, maybe that's me. and, and so that's when I started to really write the book. That's what got me into it. Not in the beginning, and it was not my intent. And frankly, it would have scared me to death if I had known how much material lay ahead. I would never have attempted to go down that path. And I remember even after that point, it took me 7 years from that point to put that book together. Now, I did other things too along the way. Of course, I had to put food on the table and pay the rent. So I was doing other things too. I was still doing my documentary films, so-called, and very low budget things, and other things, giving speeches and that kind of thing. But it took me 7 years to put that together. And the reason I'm going into depth, because you're bringing all this up in my memory again, is that twice in that 7-year period, I gave up. I just came to the point where I thought, this is just too big for me. Even though I'm a financial planner and all of that. Everything I dug into, I found out it was like a door that you open up into a room with 10 other doors. And then you have to open up all of those 10. And each of those open up into a room with 10 more doors. And the more I learned about banking and the history of fractional reserve banking in particular, the funding of wars, the deceit, the lies, the legalized plunder that's built into the system, all of the things they do not teach at the College for Financial Planning. But all these things that I learned, I thought, gosh, this is just too big a topic for me. Somebody else has got to do this, and I quit. I didn't want to make a fool of myself. But something was burning inside my belly, I guess. That's how they call it. I did have a fire in my belly. I said, I've got to finish this. I got to finish it. So back I went. I went through that cycle twice. And finally, the second time, I finished it through. So that's the short version, believe it or not, of how I came to write that book. I did not intend to do it. And if I had known what lay ahead, I surely wouldn't have started down that path.
Well, yeah, it is a monstrous topic, and the book is definitely, it is very well researched and incredible in detail. And in fact, I have to credit the book, and many people in the documentary, mentioned your book as inspiration for changing their path in life in terms of their financial education. At least 5 to 6 of the 15 people led off with that. They said that my financial, speaking as them, my financial education started not when I went to college to be a financial planner, or not when I was a mortgage-backed security officer, or even people who are in the gold and silver industries. My education started when I finished The Creature from Jekyll Island. And then that, yeah, and that, because we're not taught financial education in our system, right? And we don't actually know that the traditional powers that be, the bankers, the elite, the Rothschilds, and so on, are the ones that institute systems that keep us, kind of down. And I think that that there's more people becoming aware of this. And certainly the goal, when I read your book, I understood that was the primary thesis of this documentary, Money Disrupted, was, how do I showcase the monstrous task of bringing the Federal Reserve to life? And from the very first chapter I read, I could see it visually. So if you'll bear with me, I'll just play a 1-minute clip from the documentary. This is in vertical format, so it's a way that we show it on social media. It's a bit longer when you watch the documentary, but it abbreviated for the purposes of this. But I'd love to show you just a clip of you describing what the Federal Reserve System is.
Oh, I would love to see that, Christopher.
Yeah,
I hope I did an acceptable job. We'll find out.
So this is just a very abbreviated version of this from the documentary, but of course in the documentary we go much more detail. This is sort of towards the very beginning of the film for those who have seen it. This is Mr. Griffin talking about the origins of the Federal Reserve. So here we go.
That they went in secret to a meeting on Jekyll Island back in 1910 where they worked this all out. When I say they, I'm talking about 6 of the leaders of the most prominent banks in America. So here are the 6 people who created the Federal Reserve. Nelson Aldrich, Abraham Fiat Andrew, Frank A. Vanderlip, Henry P. Davison, Benjamin Strong, Paul Warburg, with perhaps the most important person in terms of as being a technician and structuring the Federal Reserve correctly. These people represented directly in assets that they personally owned or indirectly in assets that they controlled through being the executives of these large banking firms, 1/4 of the entire wealth of the world.
So that's a abbreviated version, but
highly condensed, but still accurate.
Yeah, highly condensed for the purposes of television, or whatever. But it still hit me every time I watched your interview, because I spent a lot of time with you in the editing room. I only spent a half of a day with you in person, but I spent a lot of time editing you. And there are 2 things that stood with me, and one of them was that moment where you really landed that the individuals who helped create the Federal Reserve System were representative of 1/4 of the world's wealth. And that always hit me heavily, because you're looking at basically the banking industry regulating itself, or handshaking with itself to create a system so that they could forever be able to bail themselves out, which we saw that manifest in the 2008 financial collapse. But this is obviously in the documentary we cover that this comes out of the 1907 banking emergency that they had, and JP Morgan and Rockefellers and everyone gets together and says, how do we build a system where this doesn't happen? So talk to me about, if you can remember, or if this jogs your memory, what are some of the kind of what are the paths that you took to find the origins of this monstrous system that is the Federal Reserve? Like, how did you actually, obviously there's a wealth of knowledge behind you. I remember going to your home and, looking at your bookcase and seeing all of the, a lot of the materials you have, but how did you actually find that initial, this is where this whole thing started? Because obviously you can start at the 1913 passage of the Federal Reserve Act, and you also have the 1913 Amendment number 16, which allows the federal government to actually tax us, which they couldn't tax us before that. But what led you back to Jekyll Island? Can you remember what you came across that actually brought you to the 1910 gathering of those powerful individuals?
No, not specifically. I guess it was a composite, because the Jekyll Island story was always part of it from the very beginning. I remember even before I became involved in my first attempt at gathering information, I had heard about it, a trip to Jekyll Island and the Federal Reserve System, but I didn't know what it meant. Where's Jekyll Island, and why did they go to Jekyll Island? I had no idea. Just I'd heard that word, and I thought, Jekyll Island, it sounds evil, doesn't it? Jekyll, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, And although at the time I hadn't read Jekyll and Hyde, because I always thought Jekyll was the bad guy and Hyde was the good guy. It turns out to be the other way around. Anyway, you learn a lot when you read these books. And so it's something that gathered over time. I did go, of course, to Jekyll Island a couple of times, and I was surprised, because I expected to see something a little bit more sinister. I expected to see something more revealing, but I saw none of that. I just saw all of this grandeur, this obvious wealth from that period of time. These cottages, they called them cottages. There were 14-room mansions for most of us. And at a time when people were lucky to have a bathroom, most of these cottages had 5, 6, or 7 of them. And that was what I saw. I was looking at all of the outward stuff on the paint and the lawns and the beautiful statuettes and the pictures on the wall, and the stories of these people living in such high society, the silk hats and the ladies with the long gowns, that's everywhere on Jekyll Island. those are the mementos that you go in to see as a tourist. It's very impressive. Well, I was very impressed. I took the tour, walked around, but where I got off the rail, you might say, is when I went over to the museum on the island, kind of a small museum, kind of a mixture of museum or not a museum, but a library, and the official headquarters of the island. And they had all of the records, the historical records there. And I approached the ladies who were in charge of those, introduced myself, and told them I was doing a book on the Federal Reserve, and I know Jekyll Island was a very important part of that, and I would be interested if they had anything that I could examine to enlighten me what happened here. And they were quite cooperative. Oh yes, Mr. Griffin, yes we have. Let me show you over here and over here, pictures and everything. And they were very proud of the fact that all these very wealthy people were founding members of Jekyll Island, and they had pictures and stories about them and reprints of magazine articles over the years, and all the old history books were there. And it was a wonderful source to get me a little bit behind the scenes. And of course, the real trick, I guess what you're asking is if there is a trick or is there some special sauce that allows that to happen. And I'd say, yes, there is. And the sauce is made up of two things. One is perseverance. You just don't give up. You just keep at it and keep at it. And the other thing is go for the oldest books you can find or records of them. Sometimes they're just portfolios of correspondence. Libraries have a lot of raw material like that, not even bound in books. But you get way, way back at the origin of these events, and you can find the most amazing things. And one of the things I became pretty good at doing right off the bat is finding a book that was published, let's say, at the time of my birth. Some guy was on to the Federal Reserve System, which was, 1913. I was born in 1931, so not too much after that. But still, these people were onto it, and some of them had written books. Some of them had written biographies on other topics, and they happened to mention their involvement in the Federal Reserve System. Maybe they weren't one of the kingpins, but they were very important, or they knew the person and had a private story to tell. So in other words, perseverance and getting to the old books. And when you find a modern book, a fairly modern book, that has done all the research on it, that's valuable too, although I never trusted a modern book on the Federal Reserve. But I wanted to see where their footnotes take me. I wanted to get to the sources where they went to get the story, because quite often I found out that the original was not quite, but usually somewhat or substantially different from the version that was being written by the researcher that described it in the first place. Mm-hmm. It's essential, absolutely essential, to go to the original sources and not put too much credence on what somebody said that the original said, because quite often there was quite some difference. That's it, just perseverance and trying to get to original sources. And that's it. There's no secret.
Well, I think that's, again, your impact is, I think spawned generations of people to do the research. There's some comments here, your book is phenomenal. There's people on the live stream right now. I've given copies away, and of course, sharing you every opportunity. I thank you. Appreciate you very much. People are saying, thanks for all the great work you do and for all the great content. And everybody I interviewed, again, they referenced your book as the seminal moment that the light bulb goes off, right? And they understand, something's there. And I think the reason why I ask you about the research, because for me, I'm kind of right. I am definitely riding on your coattails and many other people's coattails, because they're the real researchers. And so my job is just to package that into a story and connect all this incredible knowledge. But I find that kind of romantic, the Indiana Jones, if you will, going to the Ark and trying to find these things. And that was actually tangentially something. I looked around in your office and I looked at a picture of you with the actual Ark, Noah's Ark. And I was like, what a fascinating thing that is, that you had gone and found the real ark. Did you write a book about that, or I'm sorry to be
Well, produced a
naive about
documentary
it?
film on it.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
gotta go watch that. I gotta go watch that. But I think it's fascinating when you just follow your curiosity to go actually find these things and find these experts. Let me play a clip that's kind of the next sort of piece of the story. So we talk about, who was behind the Federal Reserve. Now is the what. So here's just a brief clip. Again, this is an abbreviated version from what's in the documentary for the purposes of the stream and the purposes of social media. But of course, it goes into more detail when we get into the film. But here's a brief clip of, what the Federal Reserve, how's it structured, what does it do?
What is it? It's a cartel. What is the Federal Reserve? Well, first of all, it isn't what most people think it is. I thought what most people think is that the Federal Reserve is an agent of the federal government. It's not. What is it? It's a cartel.
At high-grade paper rediscounted at a Federal Reserve Bank.
They'll deposit reserves with a Federal Reserve Bank, just as they now do with their correspondent banks. And then, when a member bank takes paper to a Federal Reserve Bank for rediscounting, it will get its reserve account credited with the appropriate amount, payable in our proposed Federal Reserve notes. And this new currency will always be available because it'll be based on the very paper which is rediscounted with the Federal Reserve.
So I borrowed a little mid-century in knowledge for that, but it explains it well, and it goes on to explain that there are 12 branches of the Federal Reserve Bank, and that those branches are ostensibly owned by the banks themselves. So, when you go to describe what the Federal Reserve is, I think that people don't even realize that it's a corporation, and that's kind of a loophole because the Constitution forbids the government from printing money. I think that's probably the primary exploit, but there's probably others. But what's your kind of, other than understanding that it's a cartel of bankers controlling the financial system, what's kind of your go-to definition or explanation of what the Federal Reserve is?
Well, that's it. The simple definition is it's a cartel. Now, a lot of people really don't know what a cartel is.
Mm-hmm.
So you start with that. A cartel, the simplified definition is it's a coalition of competitors in a certain field who have agreed to come together and to limit their competition by agreement so that they can improve their profit margins in the marketplace. They figure if they can get everybody that produces little green widgets to agree to charge $10 and no less, well, then they don't have to sell them for $3, which they could do. But they all agree to sell them for no less than 10. That's why they form cartels. They form cartels so they can share patents and processes and territories and prices, so that they can gradually reduce the areas of competition between them to the point where they operate essentially as one business unit, even though they are separate competitors. The cartel was introduced to the world, I don't know the exact date, but of course it came from Europe. And I think the first major cartel that I'm aware of is let's see, it's the German phrase. It's in Germany. I'm embarrassed now. I can't think of the name of the German name for the cartel. Interesting Gemeinschaft. IG Farben. IG Farben. I had to think of what the initials were. IG is Interessengemeinschaft. I didn't pronounce that very well, but that means a community of interest. And it formed that in Germany before, I think it was even before World War I. And it started off as an industry of dye stuffs. These were the companies that were making dyes for cloth. And so they were into chemistry. One of the first ones to get officially and commercially into chemistry. And then from that, it widened out to other chemicals until finally they got into the kind of chemistry we called explosives. And now they're a military manufacturing industry. grew out of dyestuffs. And by the time we see it in World War II, Interessengemeinschaft is primarily pharmaceuticals and weapons of war, explosives, things like that. In other words, these people, these companies came together. They were competitors, but they said, look, the world is willing to pay any price we ask to save lives and to kill. They want to win the war at any price, and they want to save their lives at any price. So let's form a cartel so we don't have to compete with each other and lower the prices down to where they should be. We'll just agree to keep the prices way, way, way up, and we'll all be better off for it. So that was the beginning of the cartel between World War I and World War II. So by the time the Federal Reserve System comes along, about the only industry that hadn't been cartelized was banking. So this is what the whole purpose of the meeting on Jekyll Island was about, was to create a cartel to do exactly that same function for the banking industry, only beyond, because in addition to making profits greater and to avoiding competition, it quickly became a plan to acquire political influence and control over governments. And once that crept into the equation, it metamorphed, you might say, quite quickly into the power behind the throne sort of a thing. This is kind of, by the way, you talk about things to research that in the future. This very topic we're talking about, banking and economics, I thought I had a pretty good handle on it by the time I got through with the Federal Reserve and I'll bring it up to date. And then I discovered fairly recently that the origins of this go way back further than I realized, into the era of mercantilism. I never knew what mercantilism even was. Well, now I'm beginning to learn. I have a whole new field open, and my next book will undoubtedly include something about mercantilism, which takes us all the way back to ancient Egypt. And we'll find out that there was always a merchant craft of people who were the power behind the throne. And it was the money that controlled the government, and not the government controlled the money. And I thought, wow, that has been going on all this time, and that's what's going on today. So I wandered from the track of the question.
No, I'm in love with this whole thing. It reminds me of Game of Thrones. Have you ever seen Game of Thrones or read any of the books?
No, I never have.
Well, there's a very key concept there that relates to that, which is that all of the various warring factions all go to the same place. They go to the Iron Bank, which is a nation of very powerful merchants that holds all of the debt to all of the different nations.
It's history yes. That I didn't know anything about. Well hidden.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Griffin, maybe we can, maybe if I'm so honored, maybe I can swing by and read a manuscript from that at some point, or maybe even partner with you on a documentary. Maybe we could co-direct together.
I'm ready to go. That's what
I'm serious. I would do it. So one part of the book that, because I had to span 250 years of American history. So there's some sections before the Federal Reserve where we talk about how the Constitution was formed and how Alexander Hamilton was fighting for the Federalist Party. They wanted the banks, and then Thomas Jefferson was the anti-federalist and didn't want the banks in there. I go through the creation of the first two central banks and how their charters eventually ended, right? Famously, Andrew Jackson ended the second one. So then we get into the 20th century after the Federal Reserve's created. And in the first few years of that thing being there, we think inflation's bad now. Those first few years, 1914, 15 to 1920, the American public experienced there was World War I was going on, and we experienced in this nation a almost 100% inflation rate for a period of 5 years. So we doubled, essentially everything doubled in cost and expenses. And your book goes into a period of time. I'm going to play a clip for after the Second World War, where we become the quote unquote global reserve currency at Bretton Woods. So I cover that in the documentary, but I'm going to show a little clip from there. And then I want to talk about something that isn't in the documentary, but that did stick with me from your book. It was just sort of something I didn't have the time or knowledge to go into in this particular film. Let me play the clip now of you discussing Bretton Woods, the end of World War II, and where really the United States dollar became the global reserve currency. So let's take a look at that right now.
Part of this huge, monstrous story of the destruction of money is the Bretton Woods Conference that occurred shortly after the end of World War II. The American dollar was decided to be the one that they would use as the reference point for all international exchange. A one currency that could be used by all nations as the clearinghouse currency. All the others would be geared to the value of that one currency. The people involved in this no longer were just interested in making big money. And they began to dream about political power and global power. And the phrase that they invented at that time was called the New World Order.
So the New World Order. So, I follow up, again, that's abbreviated for the purposes of this. Of course, I go a little longer than that, or a lot longer than that. But for your concept of the New World Order in the book, what does that mean to you in the context of Bretton Woods and after the World War II was completed and the United States establishing itself as the global reserve currency? When you say that, that was the second time, by the way, in your interview. The first was the 6 people who founded the Federal Reserve held 1/4 of the world's value. That stuck with me, never forgot it. It's in the documentary. The second part, that's sort of what I would refer to as a mic drop moment, is when you described the formation of the global reserve currency as the formation of, or the startings of, the New World Order. And your book does go into a lot more detail about that. It's not an area that I go into for long, but talk to me about what that is. What is the New World Order in that context?
Well, I suppose the answer I might concoct, well, first of all, my answer will probably change from day to day, depending on my mood.
Okay, well, that's fair.
That's fair. But it will never change in substance, but maybe the words I choose to describe it. Secondly, it's what I was talking about a little while ago, mercantilism. The fact that the world is not like we read it in our textbooks in school, where there were a bunch of nations that gradually formed and they became competitors and they fought against each other. Some rose and some fell. Empires grew and they collapsed. And it was all a result of chaos and competition. And we had winners and losers, and so forth. And here we are today going through the same thing. Well, that's kind of the pattern that I believed in all along. And it's pretty obvious. It looks that way on the surface. But when you go a little bit deeper, you realize that always, even during those tumultuous times, when there seemed to be revolutions and overthrowing and so forth, the powers behind the throne, which is the only phrase I can think of that describes it succinctly, always survived somehow. And the tyrants would wind up probably being hung or slaughtered in some way or shot. And new ones would come along, new kings, new prime ministers, new politicians, new admirals, new generals, new warriors. But always there were certain forces behind the scene that provided the money for all this. These wars didn't just happen. Even the kings had to finance their wars somehow, because you can force people to do things as slaves, but you can't force them to build the weapons of war because they don't know how. You've got to find people with know-how, and you have to pay them. If you kill them, you still don't have your weapons of war. So if you want to win a war, you have to have money so you can buy the expertise, usually the weaponry expertise, and of course the brain power and the strategists and so forth to win the war. So money has always been that invisible force that's been like the blood in the veins of history. And we're always looking at the skin and the boils on the skin and the cuts and the wounds on the skin. We're not looking at the heart and the bloodstream, which is money, the merchant side of all of this. So these merchants, it's obvious, they don't like to compete with each other, and they all, although they are competitors, even today, I think there's no one world completely unified single force. I think the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds are probably representative of the two major branches of what you might call friendly competitors. They admire each other, they respect each other, they honor each other, but they fight with each other. And they would, if they could, they'd probably trip up the other side and take over their position if they could. Now, that is the kind of a world that has always been global, even though we're looking at nations and battles between the US and Germany and China and Japan, and we always got these flags on the battlefield and so forth. What we don't see is the flags way in the background that have dollar signs on them. Or
right. Yes.
Way in the background. So when we talk today about the New World Order, we don't know for sure what the original spokesman had in mind when they used that word. I don't necessarily think that all of the people that use the word that we would consider to be leaders, political leaders, I don't think that all of them really understood deeply what I just said a moment ago about the real control in the background. You have to be really at the top to understand that. But if you're in the middle management or above that, and you happen to be, let's say you're a president of the United States, and you got there only because the bankers in the United States said, look, we'll support your campaign, we'll donate millions of dollars, and we, as you know, we own most of the major newspapers, and we'll see to it that you get good press. Oh, by the way, we also own the TV network, so we'll see that you get good TV press, and we can make you president. Now, the president may not understand what that's all about. He might just think, well, these guys want their profits, so they want their special favors, and I can give it to them. I'm a deal maker. I know how to make a deal. But what they may not or may see, I don't know, is that behind that, they are a global network. They have always thought of this conflict, nation to nation, as something that is deeper than nation to nation. They've always had this dream of one system controlled financially or psychologically in some way. Financially is psychologically, by the way. And they have to control that with some means other than or in addition to military prowess. So it's always been that way. The New World Order just happens to be a new name slapped on it. Who knows, 10 years from now, that may be gone. Maybe we'll be talking about the new administration or something. Remember, it was when Woodrow Wilson wrote a book under a pseudonym. I think it was called Philip Drew Administrator. This is Woodrow Wilson in the White House, remind you, and he had a guy, it was Colonel Edward Mandell House, who was a mysterious figure, came from England, and he had an office in the White House. He was the power behind Woodrow Wilson. He had dominated Woodrow Wilson psychologically. Historical records prove that beyond any shadow of a doubt. Even his wife, Woodrow Wilson's wife, was jealous of this man because this man Woodrow Wilson listened more to Edward Mandell House than he listened to his wife. And that's another story in itself, a very interesting battle between House and Mrs. Wilson when House had a stroke. Anyway, I'm off the track again, but I'm talking now about people behind the throne, even the throne in the United States. We think we vote for our president, we vote for our senators and our congressmen, but we don't see those hidden forces behind those people who are making the campaign donations. The lobbyists, the people who run the banks, provide the credit. That is the New World Order, and that's what it's always been. Although it didn't appear in the beginning, it appeared to be nations were trying to figure out how they can merge and be at one with each other through something like, the United Nations. Even at the United Nations, who do you suppose built the building, paid for the building and the land on which the United Nations stands? It's Rockefeller, of course. It's always, whenever you look deeply enough, you find out that it's the mercantilists, the people who have the money and who can make the money, who are the power behind the throne. And the best answer I can give you as to what the New World Order means is that it's the finalization of that process, so that finally there will be one world order based on financial control through money that's digitized and programmable, so that they can turn off your personal money supply and make you do what you don't want to do or starve.
Yeah, I agree completely that the true power behind is always the money, right? Ron Paul, in his interview with me, that was one thing that struck me, because he identified the deep state as ostensibly the power behind the power behind Congress, the special interest. He said, anytime you wanted to get anything done, the special interest would come, the beast would reveal itself, and a very telling documentary that I saw was called Drain the Swamp. And it's about what congressmen actually go through. And they show up. I don't know if you've ever seen this documentary, Mr. Griffin, but what they expose is the very first day after they do orientation at the House representative, they're given a slip of paper. It tells them how much money they need to raise. They have to go across the street to the call center and start calling up special interests. So this is ostensibly the system revealing itself is not built for any of us. And because of the Federal Reserve's ability to soak up any sort of shortcomings, money printing is a third rail in politics always. How do people win? Free, free, free. That's how Mandami won his election in the mayor, right? Everything is free. There's nothing costs money, nothing has value. And the way that you achieve that is you print it. And the Federal Reserve enables that system to take place. And the special interests are always vying. And I feel like, the special interests are just kind of team in the United States, energy, military industrial complex, team red, healthcare industry, banking industry, team blue. And, they just kind of vie with each other, but really they're just two ends of the same.
Yeah. And I think an interesting footnote on this, when you understand how this hidden agenda works and how they get away with it, is they always appear to be splintered. There are always at least two sides, that they control both sides.
Right.
There's always at least two, maybe three, so that the gum chewing public gets the feeling of, well, which side should I be on?
Sure.
Now, if we believe what I learned in school, which was a long time ago, that communism was extreme left wing, what was the extreme right wing? What was the opposite? Well, fascism. Well, as a young kid, I thought, well, I don't want to be communist. I hate those guys. Look what they do to humanity, the countries. They destroy them. If I want to really be against communism, what am I? Oh, I guess I have to be an extreme right winger. Nobody wants to be a middle of the roader when life and death is at stake. You've got to choose sides, man, So the option that we're given without realizing it, we've got to be a left wing or right wing. And even today, how many of our conservative, quote unquote, friends who don't know what conservative really means, how many of our patriot friends that don't know what that word means either, say, well, I'm on the right and I like this guy on the right. Those people on the left they stick with those words that are garbage. They have no idea what they're talking about. And they're putty in the hands of these master politicians. So that's what we're talking about. When we say the New World Order, we're talking about control from the top. And it's being built around us right now faster than you can imagine. People don't see it. They see it. Oh, well, this is AI. That's interesting. I think I like that. Oh, we're going to have digital currency. Oh, that's good. That'll drive the bankers crazy, won't it? We'll be able to have private transactions, won't we? I mean, people have no idea how they're being deceived, and they can hardly wait to bring it upon themselves so they can be enslaved. Well, this is our mission. This is why we're here, because we want to stop that. Normally, you would say, well, let them go. What the heck? They're stupid. Now, we told them again. We told them a third and fourth time, and they laugh at us. They call us names. We want to say, what the hell with them? Let them go sink. But the trouble is, we're all on the same ship. If they sink, we sink too. So we have no choice. We have to go back to our brethren and say, look, let's go over this again. I want to repeat this one more time. Please listen, because we're both in the same boat.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I look forward to, continuing to see your writings. You told me earlier that you're, working on another book, and I think providing us, the general public with the intellect you have and capturing the concepts of, what does it actually mean? Because after it's sort of one of these things, the more you read, the more questions you have. And then at some point you just kind of, I find myself sometimes reading your book and many other books, getting lost in the sort of, is there a solution to any of this? Are we just gonna, spiral out of control? The fiat system. When I asked Ron Paul, is the Federal Reserve System going to end? Do we, the people, need to rise against it? And he said, Chris, it's going to destroy itself, and it will be replaced with something potentially even worse. So it's going to destroy itself, and we're in what we call the great financial reset. There is this financial reset upon us, because the fiat system, the Federal Reserve System as it stands, can only go so much further before we're printing so much money that we're just in the debt printing oblivion scenario where we go into a death loop. But at the same time, asset-backed dollars, or gold-backed, oil-backed dollars, it's kind of, you can kind of understand, if you want to believe that that's the strategy of the current administration to secure natural resources all over the world. But I want to leave with this and say, and maybe this isn't a short answer, but just ask you, what do you see? I think you gave a warning against digital money, and I think CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies, are very dangerous because of social credit scores and so on. But where do you see us kind of, where do you see, as you, in all the wisdom you have, as we move forward over the next couple of years, what do you see as sort of the spiral of the fiat dollar? What do you think is going to come? Is it going to be the digital dollar that will replace it? Are we going to go back to an asset-backed economy, or are we going to go into some other type of thing that you think?
Well, I think that the answer to that is pretty easy. And the answer is, it depends on us. If we do nothing except just observe it and talk about it and complain about it and warn about it, then it's not going to be impeded in any way. You have to stop it, not just analyze it and say, we got to do something. You have to stop it. No, that depends on us, because they're not going to stop it. We can't send them you can't send a letter to your congressman and say, dear congressman, are you aware that you should know about this? Don't you think we should vote against this? They are not listening to us. They don't care what we think. They're already in the grips of this hidden economic thing behind the throne. It's money, money, money. They won't even be elected unless they have that support, and they know that. So they'll pretend like they care about us, because they don't want us revolting against them. They want us to sort of shut up and be, okay, we told you what we think. Now we go back and watch Dancing with the Stars. That's what they want. And they'll say, okay, we'll look into that. They'll postpone it. They'll even commit to doing something about it. I remember when Ron Paul was in office, I think it was him, I'm pretty sure it was, that came up and he had a bill to audit the Fed. Mm-hmm. Well, he got a lot of co-signers on that. Everybody wanted to sign, yeah, let's audit the Fed. What the heck good does it do to audit the Fed? We already know what the Fed is doing. It's criminal at every level. You don't need to audit the Fed. You don't need to know that how much they stole. You just know that they stole it all. And that's all you need to know. We know that. Why are we talking about auditing the Fed? So finally, after all these people signed on, yeah, we're going to audit the Fed. That's safe. Now the day came and somebody's decided, let's set this in the schedule to call for a vote on it. And I've forgotten the number, but I think it was over 90% of those co-signers took their names off. Most of them did. I know there was most of them. They weren't going to go. They'd never intended to audit the Fed, even though it wouldn't do any good, because the audit would have taken 10 years. You know how those things are.
Yeah.
And when it was all over, they would have said, well, we audited the Fed and we found this little misdemeanor. That was not good. We got rid of that. And we found that, that was not either. But there was just an exception. Everything looks good. Everything's fine. And so we got to stop playing their game. We got to realize that the people who are running the show today have got to be removed because they're all corrupt. Now, I shouldn't say all, there are a few, but let's be smart about it. You know, how much time do we have? We have 3 more minutes.
Yeah, of course. It's all we're your schedule, Mr. Griffin. So whatever you want to say.
Maybe I've told this story to you. I might even be in the film. One of my favorite stories. And it has to do with a letter that was written to Thomas Jefferson right after the signing of the new Constitution at the closing of the Constitutional Convention. And this letter came from a friend of Jefferson's who was a doctor. I don't remember his name, but this is in the Jefferson Library. It's handwritten letter. And the letter went something like this. Dear Mr. Jefferson, now that we have our new republic and our new Constitution, our new government, I think is the word they used, how can we be sure that only good men will be in office? This is the question, basically. And Jefferson's answer was brilliant. It was a little bit irate, but controlled. He said, let us not speak of good men in office. In other words, he's saying, good men in office, are you kidding? Politicians, are you kidding me? It'd be in modern language. He said, let us not speak of good men in office. Rather, let us speak of chains of the Constitution put on to these men. Because we must, and he didn't go on, that was essentially what he said, but the essence was, of course, we're not going to have good men in office. We're going to have evil men in office because government is a magnet for the predator class. Every crook in the world wants to be in government if they could possibly be. So they can put other people in jail who are questioning their integrity. So they can get away with their crimes and put the good people in jail. You have to understand this is psychological, this is natural, this is human nature. So anybody that builds a political system based on good men in office is stupid. And that's my message. We have to be suspicious of people in office. We have to design constitutions and laws on the assumption that there will be the criminal class attempting to destroy them or find a way around those words that we so carefully conceive. And if we don't do that, we're stupid and we deserve to lose our liberty. That's my position. So we have to change our attitude and just stop writing letters to our congressmen. We've got to make sure that we have men in office who understand what we're talking about and who are committed their lives to making sure that everyone understands these principles and that they honor them. No, I'm off the soapbox now.
No, it's incredible. I mean, the way I end the film is ostensibly similar to this, which is that if we don't demand sound money people in Congress, or if we don't block the things that will enslave us, be it digital ID or digital bank central currency, and if we don't participate in our country, in our government, then it will control us, absolutely. And the end of the film is a imagination version of us taking the country back, which is thousands of people flooding into Washington, D.C. with Uncle Sam masks on, and they're destroying the institution of the Federal Reserve because it is the main institution by which the New World Order, the money power that is behind most of the politicians, is able to have that infinite printing glitch, and that descends into the elite class far before it descends to us. And so the takeaway is, hold something real, something tangible, gold or silver in your physical possession if you can, or an asset that you believe can weather the storm of this fiat mess that we're going through. And ultimately, we need to hold our system accountable and awaken as many people as possible. And I will tell people on this stream, there's, those that are out there, I told Mr. Griffin beforehand, this phrase, and the Fed, is still throttled to this day. And that the social media, even though we're having discourse over these platforms, they still control very much what we're able to say and not say, share within each other. So it's important that we continue to have gatherings like Mr. Griffin's Red Pill Expo, and gatherings, even in your own community to discuss these things, read these books in paper. And so I'm very grateful, eternally grateful, Mr. Griffin, that you've written your book, The Creature of Jekyll Island, and all of your other books, actually, which are all great topics for documentaries that you have both created and that many, I hope, will contemporize, or that there's an opportunity to collaborate with the great intellect that you have to take these stories and reach the next generation of people. And I hope that we all hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we're not, buffooned into letting this new world order control us in every aspect of our life. So from my side, I'm very grateful that I had the chance to interview you for the documentary and even speak to you right now. And I hope to continue to collaborate with you in future projects. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, Mr. Griffin appears in a documentary that I created, Money Disrupted and the Fed, which is a retelling of parts of his book, parts of other books about how we reached where we are today, which is sort of the end, or the turning, the end of the fiat system as it stands. And what are we going after this? What is the new financial system that will be presented to us, and what do we do next? So, Mr. Griffin, thank you again for reaching out and for being willing to speak with me about this. And thank you again, plugging Rob Cunningham, who actually helped me reach you. So I thank him as well, because without him, I wouldn't be talking to you. But thank you so much, Mr. Griffin.
Well, Christopher, thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad you did what you did. I saw that clip, and I remember when I saw it, I think I did glance at that video when you sent it to me before, but I haven't seen the whole thing. So when this interview stops, I'm going to go right to it and watch the whole thing.
I can't wait.
And thank you for producing it, because I'm sure that'll reach a huge audience. People need to know this message.
Absolutely, yes. And I appreciate those that purchase the film and help support. That's how I put food on the table for my family, is creating these things. And really, it was just, me in a room and in the editing all of your incredible knowledge, everybody who participated in the documentary for about a year. So I appreciate that. And thanks so much again, Mr. Griffin, for appearing in the documentary. And so thank you for everybody watching the stream. I'm going to end this now, but for those that haven't seen Money Disrupted yet, you can view it on our website, fruitionproductions.com/Money Disrupted. It's available now for, you can own it, and you can save 25% by using the wonderful catchphrase "and the Fed" as a promo code, and you'll save 25% on purchasing that film. So please let your friends and family know, or if you've already purchased it, please show anybody and everybody that you can. I appreciate that. And thank you again, everybody, for watching. Until next time, Mr. Griffin, I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.